Today, we are going to be continuing on in the series that we have been in the last 6 weeks, walking through the life story narrative of Joseph. If you have been in and around the last 6 weeks or are at all familiar with the story of Joseph, you'll know it's been one of twists and turns and up and downs. There's so much good stuff to look at in the life of Joseph. There's so many good things in there to pull out about how we can trust God despite our circumstances and situations that make no sense. But it's actually important that we kind of step back and recognize that Joseph is actually a side character in this larger Old Testament narrative. We will see today in our series that the text is actually going to pivot away from Joseph and onto his father, Jacob. The larger story that God is orchestrating here in the Old Testament, it revolves around a nation, and that nation is the nation of Israel. It's a people that is actually named after Joseph's father, Jacob. So the man that we have been kind of watching from a distance for the last 6 weeks as we've been looking at this story and life of Joseph, he is going to be the main character of our text today. We are going to be in chapter 46 of the book of Genesis. That's page 41 if you are using that black Bible right there. I'm going to encourage you, go ahead and find a Bible. Go ahead and get there. But before we read, we actually need some context. Does anybody here like context, or do you just like flying blind? Raise your hand if you like context. Big context guy myself. I love context. I don't need everything, but just like a bit of background is nice. Have you ever walked into the last 10 minutes of a movie? Maybe this is like a family movie night. You stroll into the living room. You look over this way. Everybody on the couch is a mess. I mean, your wife is crying in this corner. Somebody is clutching a pillow in this corner. Dogs are on the floor. They're crying too. You're like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So you turn your attention to the TV screen, and on that TV screen you see two men hugging. It's an old man and a young man, and they are warmly embracing one another. You are standing there, you're holding your bag of chips, and you're like, hey, this is awesome. Two men, encouraging one another. But I'm not sure what all the fuss is about. You would not be wrong to have that reaction. You're not cold-hearted, you're not apathetic, any of those things. You just missed the previous 2 hours of the movie. That's kind of what is going to play out here in chapter 46. We're going to see that exact kind of scene at the very end, but we can't just wander in there, because if we walk into verse 1, we're going to have absolutely no idea why it matters and why it's so meaningful. So we're actually going to take the first part of today to kind of back up and get that first 2 hours. So the backstory of Jacob, remember this is Joseph's father, it starts in the shadow of greatness. Has anybody heard of Abraham? The father Abraham. So this is his grandfather. His father, Jacob's father, is Isaac. Isaac is this miracle child. He is born to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, born in the shadow of greatness. Isaac and his wife, they are expecting twins, and while they're expecting, God prophesies and warns them. He says, hey, these two boys, this is not going to be an ordinary pregnancy. These are going to be two different nations. And the older is going to wind up serving the younger. When these boys arrived, the differences between them were stark. First came Esau. Esau was red in complexion. He was hairy. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter. This was his father's favorite child. Then along comes Jacob, our main character today, and he is born gripping his brother Esau's heel. He is quiet. He's a homebody. This is his mother's favorite child. Now, we've seen this already in the context of the series. We've seen favoritism. We have seen partiality. And I think it's important that we just don't kind of gloss over this here. This sin that James and Paul and the rest of the saints of the New Testament that we see play out, it shows up again here. But it actually doesn't start with Joseph. It starts generations earlier in the tent of his great-grandfather. Now, it's a different sermon for a different day. We're not going to spend too much time on that. But I do think it is important for all of us in the room to know that patterns of sin don't just die when we die. these patterns of sin, these trends, these behaviors that we create, they can embed themselves in our families, they can affect our communities, they're going to impact generations long after we pass on into our next chapter. And that's why holiness matters so much. That's why holiness matters so much. We need to commit ourselves to holiness. Just as 1 Peter chapter 1 says, I shared this with the team this morning, but as the one who called you as holy, we are to conduct ourselves as holy in all our conduct. So let's be holy. Let's not keep perpetuating patterns of sin. This rivalry between Jacob and Esau, back to our story, it eventually explodes over inheritance. There's a situation where Jacob, he winds up putting on his brother's clothes. He covers his hands and his neck in goat skins. He's faking his brother's hair. He walks into his blind elderly father's tent, and he tricks him into giving him his brother's blessing. He steals it from his brother. As you can imagine, this didn't just create a little bit of tension. This starts a full-blown war. When Esau finds out, he actually swears to kill Jacob the moment that their father dies. And so Jacob is left with really one option, and that is to run. And that's what he does. He flees. And this is a pivotal moment that we're going to come back to later, so really lock in with me here. Jacob is a young man now. He is on the run. He has burned every bridge. He has no idea of where he's headed, no idea of what's in front of him. He just knows that he can't stay where he is at. And he finds himself in the middle of the desert. This is unequivocally the worst night of his life. The sun is going down. There's no inn, there's no tent. And he lies down in the dirt, and he puts a rock under his head for a pillow. He begins to fall asleep. When he falls asleep, he begins to dream. And during that dream, you've probably heard this before, but he sees this stairway to heaven. Sometimes this is called a stairway to heaven. Sometimes people depict it as a ladder. But he sees this thing leading up to heaven, and up and down this ladder, this stairway, there are angels. They're coming up and they're going down. And then God appears in that dream to Jacob, and he says, Jacob, I am the God of your father Abraham. I will make you into a great nation. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. And Jacob, just like all of us would, he wakes up from this dream in awe. He's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? He names the place Bethel, which means house of God, and he actually stands that rock up as a pillar, and he vows to worship the God who met him in the middle of his running. So remember that. Store that in your memory bank. Remember the rock. Remember that dream. Jacob continues on his journey, fleeing from his brother. He makes it to his uncle's Laban's house, where the deceiver Jacob, he's finally deceived. He gets one-upped. He works for 7 years for this woman that he loves, only for her to be exchanged for her sister on the night of his wedding. I know we don't do that in modern culture, but here is what is important for us to know, what I want you to take away, why this matters. We have two sisters. We now have one husband, and they're going to compete with one another for his affection by having children. They have 11 sons, and then finally one day God remembers Rachel. She gives birth to a son with Jacob, and his name is Joseph. Is anybody starting to see some patterns here, some family dynamics that keep recurring and playing out? Now we're almost in the present. We're almost there. After 20 years, Jacob goes home to face his brother Esau. He wrestles with a divine figure in the night on the way there. He walks away with a limp, and he actually walks away with a new name too. Because Jacob means heel grabber. It means supplanter. That was the name that he had earned, but God actually takes that name off him, and he gives him a new name. And that name is Israel. Israel and Esau, they reconcile, and that brings us to this series, which we've been in, which is Jacob's final chapter. He's an old man. He is settled in his role as the patriarch of these 12 tribes. But as we've seen, old habits die hard. His favoritism, the favoritism that runs in his family, it died hard here. It impacts Joseph, the firstborn son of his beloved Rachel, and it creates this dangerous rift. He gives that boy an ornate robe, and Joseph starts sharing these dreams with his brothers. They don't really like that too much, and so what do? They sell him into slavery after throwing him in a pit. They dip that beautiful coat that he was given because he was his father's favorite in blood, and they carry it to their father as proof that an animal had killed them versus them selling him. And again, Jacob is deceived. And so now, as we read last week, Joseph has risen from a slave to being the governor of Egypt. He's second only to Pharaoh. And as we watched last week, he does something extraordinary. Instead of repaying evil with evil, which he could do because of all the power that he has, instead he extends grace to his brothers, mercy to his brothers. He gives them carts, he gives them animals, he gives them provisions, and he says, hey, go get my father. Go bring your families. There are 5 more years of famine coming. That was a lot, but that's the 2 hours. That's the 2 hours. Now, let's look, read, and step into these last 10 minutes. Chapter 46, starting at verse 1. If you have a Bible, turn there. Read this with me. It says, Israel set out with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba. And he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And that night God spoke to Israel in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he said. And Jacob replied, here I am. And God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you back, and Joseph will close your eyes when you die. This is our first movement that we see in the text this morning. God speaks to Jacob and he sends him. He speaks to Jacob and he sends them. And in order for Jacob to obey when God sends him and speaks to him, he first has to recognize his voice. I want you to notice this in verses 1 and 2. Watch the names. It says, Israel had set out with all he had. That night, God spoke to Israel in a vision. But then when God speaks up and actually wants to communicate with Jacob, he says, Jacob, Jacob. So the narrator calls him Israel, but God calls him Jacob. This is now an old man. He has 12 sons. He has a limp from the night he wrestled God. He's got this new name, but God doesn't actually use that name. God reaches all the way back in the past. He grabs that name he had when he was a scared kid with his head on a rock and on the run. It's not God bringing up his record here. That's God saying, hey, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly where you've been. I've actually been here with you before. And Jacob says, here I am. It's the same God. It's the same voice. It's the same man. That's cool. But notice how it happens too. So God speaks to Jacob in a dream here, encouraging him to go to Egypt. He says, I am God, the God of your father. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. I will make you into a great nation. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to the first dream that he had as well? 70 years prior, young man on the run, middle of crisis, head on a rock, God in a dream specifically says, I'm the God of your father Abraham. I will make you into a great nation. It's the same God, it's the same method, it's the same promise. This is a key takeaway for us this morning. I think all of us would like to be able to discern God's voice a little bit better in our life when he tries to speak to us. One of the surest ways to recognize the voice of God in your life is to ask yourself something. To ask yourself, hey, is this familiar? Is this familiar? Is this how God has spoken to me before? Do I recognize this? Not does this fit the cultural narrative, but does this fit God's history with me? I'm sure we've all found ourselves at some point in the middle of a he said, she said crossfire situation. Whether that's family gossip, whether that's rumors at work, whether that is that weird separate group chat that has sprung off the main group chat. We've found ourselves in those scenarios before. When you're in that situation and something is being discussed that's about someone that you actually know, you can almost instantly tell that a story has been twisted. You can say, hey, that doesn't sound like them. That's not how they talk. That's not how they talked with me. I don't even know that they use that word. Like, that's not in their vocabulary. They're not that smart. Either somebody is lying about this person here or something has gotten lost in translation. I think the same is true for us when we are discerning the voice of God, to follow God in this world where every day things seem to get a little bit louder. We have to be able to distinguish his voice from all the other voices that are speaking into our lives. I can tell you firsthand, I am so thankful for moments that I had as a young man, sometimes on the run, as a kid, where I knew without a shadow of a doubt, God is speaking with me. Because now as an older man, not that old, as an older man though, who has a child of his own, I can better discern the voice of the Lord. I can say, hey, I recognize this. This is familiar. I've seen God communicate to me in this way before. Jesus says it over and over again in John's gospel. He says, my sheep, they know my voice. They recognize me when I call. And parents, I think this is something important for us to take away. This is one of the biggest reasons why we need to raise our kids in the church, why we need to raise our kids in a community and in homes where the Bible is read, around those who pray. It does not guarantee that our children will never stray and run. I certainly strayed and I certainly ran. What it does mean is that when God speaks to our children, whenever he does, they actually have a fighting chance at recognizing his voice. They can say, this is familiar. I've seen this before. When God speaks, we have to discern that it's him. So the first test is, does it sound like him? Is this familiar? But here's the second one. Look at verse 3. God tells Jacob, he says, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. He doesn't say, Jacob, get up and go down to Egypt or else. I've got something coming for you, Jacob, if you don't get up and go down to Egypt. No, he says, do not be afraid. God, when he speaks to us, he doesn't use fear tactics. He doesn't pose threats. He doesn't intimidate you and I into obedience. I think this is another marker. If the voice that you're hearing is threatening you, if you feel that it's coercing you, if it's holding something over your head in order to get you to move, friend, do not be deceived. That is not the voice of God. Either something has been lost in the he said, she said translation, or what you are hearing is straight from the mouth of the enemy. Do not be deceived. Now, there might be some Bible scholars in the room who are like, hey, Campbell, but what about the fear of the Lord? Like, isn't that the beginning of wisdom? Like, shouldn't we fear God? And my answer to that is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. We should have an awe. We should have a holy reverence, a deep understanding of God, his might, his power, his glory, all of those things. Isaiah, when he sees the Lord lifted up on high, he falls on his face. He says, I am ruined. And that's the right response by Isaiah. It's the right response from us. But don't get this twisted. Fearing the Lord does not mean the same thing as being afraid of him. God's voice will absolutely convict you. He will make you uncomfortable. Sometimes conviction is the most uncomfortable thing that we will ever experience. There are seasons and times when God will speak to you and he will say something to you, and it will humble you and level you in a way that no one else could humble you and level you. Very real. So how do we then discern the difference between conviction and then condemnation of the enemy? How do we discern fear of the Lord and the fear tactics of the enemy? I think this is the ultimate test and protocol. When you're listening to that voice, which direction is it leading you? Which direction is it leading you? Is that voice leading you toward God? It might hurt, but if God is speaking, he's going to draw you close. He's going to say, hey, come here. Come home. Let's deal with this together. If it's something else speaking, if it's someone else speaking, that condemnation is going to drive you away. It's going to say, hide, don't pray about this. No one can love you. Don't tell anybody you've gone too far. God is actually, he's done with you. There's no coming back from this. It might feel similarly in your chest, but there are actually two different destinations here. When Adam and Eve, they sin in the garden, what do? They go and hide. But God comes to them. He says, Adam, where are you? Calls them out, draws them in. It's this pattern that we see every time. David echoes this in the psalm. He says, "The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters." He doesn't say he terrifies me. He doesn't say he intimidates me. He coerces me into obedience. He says, no, he restores my soul. David then continues on. He says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the valley of death, I will fear no evil." And why does he say that? For you are with me. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Rods and staffs, they're kind of hard. They don't feel great sometimes. God might correct us, but he comforts us. He might convict us of sin, but he has compassion for us. And to be obedient when God sends us, when he speaks to us, we have to recognize his voice. That's movement one. God speaks and he sends Jacob. Jacob recognizes his voice. Okay, movement two. Movement two now. God has spoken to Jacob. Jacob knows the voice. Now, where is that voice sending Jacob? Here it is, movement two. God sends Jacob into the unknown. He sends him into the unknown. I thought about singing a little bit of Into the Unknown from Frozen 2 here, but I will refrain. I won't do any of that. Think about what is being asked of Jacob here. So Jacob's grandfather, Abraham, was called into Canaan. You might know this more commonly as the Promised Land. And that land is a huge piece of this covenant that God makes with Abraham. He promised him descendants. He promised him a blessing that would reach every nation on earth. He promises Abraham land to put his feet on. And now God is actually calling Jacob, his grandson, out of that promised land and into Egypt. Here's some more context that is kind of fun and interesting. Jacob had actually never been to Egypt. Not once. In fact, he had deliberately avoided it because God had told his father Isaac, hey, don't go there. I don't know if you've spent any time around church, around the Bible. You've heard the story of Joseph. I know I've heard this story so many times that I've often just lost sight of the geography of it all. Growing up hearing that Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt, I kind of thought Egypt was like that neighbor that lived 3 or 4 houses down. You might not know them. You know what kind of shirts they like to wear. You know when they take their trash out. You know what kind of car they drive. If you really wanted to, you could stand on your front porch, throw a rock, hit their house. That's how close that I thought Egypt was. In reality, Egypt is actually 300 miles away. So get this, Jacob is being sent to a place that he has never been. He was raised to avoid, and the trip to get there is going to be a brutal 300 miles, and he's old. He's old. Here's what this means for us. When God speaks and he leads us, he doesn't always lead us to comfort. He leads us, point blank. We are not guaranteed it was going to be comfortable. Let's think back on that psalm that we just recounted. David doesn't say the valley of the shadow of death is comfortable. He says, no, your rod and your staff, that's what comforts me. It's actually God's presence that comforts David. It's not his destination. The same is true here in this story with Jacob. It is God's presence that comforts Jacob, not the place that he is being sent. Verse 4, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will bring you back. Joseph will close your eyes when you die. Now let's think for a second about the thing that Jacob might actually be afraid of, because I think it's more than just the ambiguity of an unknown place. I want you to imagine walking up to a friend's house for the first time. You park your car on the street. You make the journey up the driveway. You arrive at their front door. You ring the doorbell, and you do the nice, courteous ring and step back. That's what you do. Now in this new position, a couple steps away from the door, something over here catches your eye. And it's a bright yellow sign, and it says, beware of dog. How many of you have seen those signs, the beware of dog signs? I don't know about you. Oh, thank you, Everett. I don't know about you, but when I see a beware of dog sign, I start getting loose a little bit. I start stretching the hammies because I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it could be something different coming out that door, but all my brain can fathom is like a 120-pound Rottweiler that's just about to give me the business. That's what my brain envisions. Now let's take that a little bit further. The door finally swings open, and instead of this dog that I am imagining, out wanders this elderly Chihuahua who's in his old age. He can't hear a thing. He's blind. The only reason that sign is up is because this little guy can't hear, and if he gets out, like, he is gone. The sign is up for his protection. The sign is up so he doesn't get lost. How does an elderly Chihuahua apply to this situation? His whole life, Egypt had a sign on it for Jacob. Hey, don't go down there. Beware of Egypt. But God speaks to Jacob and he says, don't be afraid. Because Egypt is not what Jacob thinks it is. Egypt is not the end of this promise that was made to his family generations earlier. Egypt is actually going to be a place where this promise of God gets kept. God actually says, I will make you into a great nation there. So this is like an intentional part of the plan for God. The place that Jacob was most afraid to go is the exact place that God had prepared to preserve him and his family. And what does Jacob do? He does something that we all should do when God speaks and he sends us. He obeys. He travels into the uncomfortable, into the unknown, and he doesn't go halfway either. He actually says, hey, pack up the entire family, all the possessions, everything. We're going. We are going. He doesn't look back. Several months ago, I was having coffee with Pastor Josh. Josh oversees operations for our church family. Great guy. Get coffee with Josh. Some best coffees that I've had. I was connecting with Josh. Josh was asking me all of the coffee questions. So he was saying, hey man, what's going on in your life? What's new? What are you processing? How do you feel like God is leading you? What's he teaching you? All of these things. And I told Josh, I was like, Josh, I got some big decisions in front of me. Like, I don't know exactly where those decisions are leading me. I want to be obedient. I want to be faithful. But I'm kind of at a point where I have to decide. I have to make a decision and do something here. And Josh, being the wise, well-read fellow that he is, he shared with me a framework for decision-making from St. Ignatius of Loyola. This is a saint and theologian from the 16th century. If you've been around me the last 8 weeks, I see some smiles. I have been talking about this nonstop. It has been really impactful for my life, but it ties so closely to what Jacob is doing right here that I want to give you guys a piece of it this morning. This is the little excerpt from Ignatius. He writes this. He says, if one has made a choice properly and with due order, without any yielding to the flesh or the world, there seems to be no reason why he should make it over. But let him perfect himself as much as possible in the one that he has made. Now, I know we don't talk like this anymore. That's a little bit of Old English, so let me translate for you. Here's what Ignatius is saying. He said, look, if you have humbled yourself before God, if you're avoiding sin, if you're not being pulled around by the flesh or pulled around by the world, if you're earnestly seeking God and you have made a decision to follow him and you don't know where it's leading you, you don't know all of the details, but you say, yeah, God, I'm going to follow you in this, then you have no reason to regret that decision. There's no reason to look back. You know, I think one of the biggest hindrances for us to obedience is when God calls us somewhere, we immediately experience a fear of regret. We're afraid to take a step forward in faith because we're going to be leaving all of these comforts that we perceive that have been built behind us. I think it exposes something fundamental about what it means to follow Jesus, about surrendering your life to Christ. For those of us who have made that decision to follow Jesus, we have to at some point come to terms with this. We have to say, and our heart posture has to be, hey, God, I don't know where you're leading me. I do not know. But God, I trust that regardless of where you're leading me, where you're taking me, God, if you're with me, it's better than anything that I've left behind. That has to be our heart posture. And that is exactly what Jacob is living out. He hears God's voice. It's leading him out of this promised land 300 miles away to a place he swore he'd never go. Jacob says, God, I trust you. Wherever you're leading, as long as I'm with you, it's better than all this stuff. It's better. I grew up in an old school Baptist church. We did not have an LED screen. with lyrics. Let's just say that. We sang out of a hymnal. And there's an old, beautiful hymn that articulates this better than I ever could. It says, I've decided to follow Jesus. I've decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. That's what Jacob does here. He follows God into the unknown. He takes a step forward in faith, and he doesn't look back. Doesn't look back. There's actually no reason to look back. And that's what we're going to see here in movement 3. Let's pick up Genesis 46, verse 28. It says, Now Jacob had sent Judah's one of his sons, ahead of him to Joseph to prepare for his arrival at Goshen. When they came to the land of Goshen, Joseph hitched the horses of his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. Joseph presented himself to him. He threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. And then Israel said to Joseph, I'm ready to die now because I have seen your face and you are still alive. This is the scene. This is it right here. This is what this whole 2-hour backstory is leading to. Imagine what Jacob is carrying. When his other sons came and presented him a bloody robe, Jacob actually tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth. He mourned. His children tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He says, I'm going to go down to Sheol mourning for my son. Decade after decade of griefs, Jacob had buried a boy who was never in a grave. And now this old man who has trusted God, he's left this promised land. He's made the 300-mile journey that he had every right to refuse. He crests this hill at Goshen, and who does he see coming? It is this chariot, and it is carrying not a young boy anymore. This is his son, Joseph. He is now this leader in Egypt. And they run to one another. Jacob's probably running really slow, but they embrace. They embrace and they weep. They're finally reunited. And then Jacob says, my favorite line in this whole chapter, I'm ready to die now because I've seen your face and you are still alive. That's the story. Let's keep reading. Joseph continues on in verse 31. He says, Joseph said to his brothers and his father's family, I will go up and inform Pharaoh, telling him that my brothers and my father's family who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. These men are shepherds. They will also raise livestock. They have brought their flocks and herds and all that they have. And when Pharaoh addresses you and he asks, what is your occupation? You're to say, your servants. Both we and our ancestors have raised livestock from our youth until now, and then you will be allowed to settle in the land of Goshen, since all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. So there isn't just a relationship that is restored here between Joseph and his father. Joseph actually has a whole plan in place. There's land ready. He has a strategy to get his family into not just any territory, but Goshen is actually going to be the best grazing territory in all of Egypt. A few chapters ago, as we unpacked, his brothers came to Egypt and they were starving. The famine was going to wipe them out if they didn't get some favor from the Egyptians and be intervened. Now, there's a place that has been prepared for him. So here's this whole question that Movement 3 and really this whole chapter have been asking. Why is Jacob able to walk into the unknown and have no regrets? I'll let you know, it's not because he was brave. It's not just because he had a good framework for decision making. It's not just because he heard God's voice, even though he did. Here it is. Jacob could walk into the unknown because it was not unknown to God. Somebody was already there. Let me read that again. Jacob could walk into the unknown because it was not unknown to God. Somebody was already there. Years before Jacob ever took a step toward Egypt, God had sent a son ahead of him. That's Joseph's own explanation just a chapter earlier. He says, hey, God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. It was not you who sent me here, but it was actually God. So that means that betrayal, that pit, that slave caravan, that false accusation, the prison, all of it, the forgotten years, God had sent Joseph and allowed Joseph to experience all of those things for this thing that we're seeing right here now. Those years that broke Jacob's heart, those years that he was grieving the loss of his son, God was actually using to prepare a place for him and the nation of Israel. That's what makes these final moments of chapter 46 matter so much. Because in the most beautiful, real, relatable way, they show us what it looks like when we meet Jesus. I want you to look at that picture. Joseph, a beloved son, he's wearing a robe given to him by his father. He's beaten, he's mocked, he's betrayed by the people that are closest to him. He becomes a servant in a foreign land. He's falsely accused and he's punished for crimes that he did not commit. Instead of lashing out, he extends grace, and he makes a way for the nation of Israel to live. Joseph is Jesus in this story. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, clothed in righteousness, stepped out of heaven and into time where he came not to be served, but to serve. He was falsely accused, he was bound, he was punished, and he was crucified on a cross for sins he did not commit. And why did he do that? So that God's people, you and me, everyone who believes in him, could live. It's one of the clearest pictures of the gospel that you will ever see. Without Joseph, the nation of Israel does not survive the famine. They die without hope. And the same is true for us. Without Jesus, we are dead in our sin, and we die with no hope. But through the person and work of Jesus, we have everything we need. Joseph is Jesus. You and I in this story, we are Jacob. We sin, and our sin creates chaos, not just amongst us, but amongst our family. There's anger and strife. Alone in our sin, we are destined to die, just like Jacob and his family were destined to starve. But Jacob is brought to the Son, and he is met by him, and he is embraced by him, and he is provided for by him, and he and his whole family are given a new lease on life that they could have never secured on their own. Here's the thing about Jacob's journey. He was not sent into the unknown and just left there. He was sent to where the Son already was. This is a cool thing that we get to experience as followers of Jesus as well. You're never stepping into the dark unknown or alone. You're actually stepping toward a Son who has been sent ahead of you, who's already gone through the worst of the worst, and he has prepared a place for you. This is what Jesus says. He says it himself. He says, I'm going away to prepare a place for you so that I and you may be there also. Somebody's already there. We may fear stepping out into the unknown. If we are discerning the voice of God and he is calling us to this place, he sent someone ahead of us. As the band comes back up, I want to invite us into a time of reflection and application. This is a great passage with lots to pull out. But I think the best application of this today would be for the people in the room who have not yet made the decision to follow Jesus. If you have never met the Son, if you can't confidently say, hey, I have seen your face, I have all that I need, I'm ready to die now, because you've been complete in him. That's what God offers. You may be trying to seek wholeness and completeness and all of these other things, but I'm going to tell you that there's no way to achieve that without the Son of God. So if you have not invited Jesus into your life, confessed him as the Lord and Savior of your life, that is the application point for you today. Invite Jesus in, accept him as your Lord and Savior. There are a few more application points for us. This is the first one that I want us to look at. I want you to ask yourself this in this time. Are you asking God to speak? And are you actually working to discern his voice in your life? I'm not talking about just asking for direction, but I'm talking about deliberately testing what you're hearing as well. Does it sound like God? Does it sound like how He's spoken to you before? How does that compare to your previous experiences? Does it sound like His word and how He speaks to His people in His word? Or does it sound like fear? Does it sound like a threat, like intimidation, like accusation? Are you asking God to speak? Or are you actually working to discern His voice? Question 2. Where in your life right now are you being disobedient to God's leading because you're idolizing comfort or you're afraid of regret? Where in your life is that happening? Maybe you are not acting like Jacob right now and obeying God into the unknown because there are things that you think and perceive in your own understanding that you are leaving behind. Where in your life are you being disobedient? And finally, third application point today. Where in your life are you looking for wholeness outside of Christ, apart from Christ? Is your faith contingent upon some blessing that you're still waiting on? Is it a spouse, a job, a healing, a resolution to something that is causing tension? Or is your faith fully centered on trusting Jesus? Jacob says it. He says, I have seen your face. You are alive. I'm ready to die. It's not a contingent faith. How would your life be different? How would my life be different if we woke up tomorrow completely content in the person and work of Jesus and said, hey, regardless of what happens, I'm good. I'm good. Church, let's pray, and then we'll enter into a time of communion together. God, we love you. God, we love you. We are thankful for you. God, I thank you for your word. God, I thank you for your faithfulness to us in our lives. But God, I thank you for your faithfulness to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Joseph. God, thank you for this beautiful picture that you've laid out for us. God, thank you for communicating to us in ways that we can understand. But God, thank you for not just communicating to us and leaving us where we're at, but sending us to something better. God, thank you for restoration by means that we never understand, that we never perceive to be possible. God, I thank you. I thank you that you sent someone ahead of us to do something that we could never do. God, I ask in this room today that if someone is in here and they do not have a relationship with you, God, I ask that you would reveal yourself to them just like you revealed yourself to Jacob in this dream. God, I ask that they would have the boldness to step into something that they don't know, which is a relationship with you. God, I ask that you would comfort them and show them that they have no reason to fear regret, but that they can step in confidently and pursue what you have for them. God, I ask for all the believers in this room, followers of Jesus. God, I ask that we would be encouraged by your word this morning. God, that whatever we face, we would not seek resolution outside of you. We would not have a contingent faith. God, I ask if there's something, if there's a decision, a trial, a problem that is ahead of us that requires that we step out in faith and into the unknown, God, I ask that you would give us boldness in that. God, I thank you for this time together. God, we honor you. We glorify you. We submit these things to you as your children. And all God's people say, amen. Amen.